instrumentalists who have already subscribed to the channel, and hi to the rest of you who haven't yet. I'm Jacques Gadway, and this is Gadway Violin. In today's episode of the Monday Music Method, we're doing another live stream in which we're taking a look at, once again, the 6 carols and 6 gifts. If you're new to the channel and or this series, you may not remember or recognize what this is, but we're taking a look at a booklet that I wrote, which the music will be on screen for the duration of this stream, in which there are 6 carols and 6 etudes. Each carol has its own accompanying etude. Today, we are not looking at what's highlighted here, Silent Night. We are looking at the 5th etude, because we've already done the other 4, preceding that in previous live streams. And so today's etude is going to be dealing with its corresponding technique here, which is going to be agility. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to play Away in a Manger, this beautiful carol, on the violin. And then we'll talk about the accompanying etude found in this booklet. If you want your own copy of the music, you can easily screen capture it right here and use it at home, or you can find it on the website in the link below for purchase, and that's a great way to support the channel if you so desire to do so. Otherwise, the music will be on screen in a small box in the corner for most of this. So like I said, first we're going to start off with Away in the Manger, the actual carol, and then I'll give you a little sneak peek. We'll work out and go into the etude. In this case today, the etude is going to be all about left hand agility. So the idea with this booklet is that we'll learn carols. God, I can't say it. We will learn carols for this time of year, for the holiday season. Hopefully you'll be able to use it, in this case, to perform for perhaps your loved ones. And then you'll have an accompanying etude for each of them, which is more for you, for your practice, your technique, and your growth as a musician and a violinist. First, let's work on the carol, though. This is definitely the easier part. The actual music of the carol is very, very simple. However, you might notice the suggested fingering here. It's a little bit complicated. In violin playing, whenever you see this marking here, a Roman numeral, that's going to be indicating a string. We count our strings from the highest or the thinnest string, and then we go all the way to the thickest string. So the highest string, being our E string, would be 1, and we would count from there. E would be 1, A would be 2, and then we have a 3 here, so that's going to be our D string. So the suggested fingering, by no means do you have to do it, but if you want to develop this skill and playing in different positions, this is a great opportunity to do so. You can alternatively play this entire carol just in first position. I won't write the fingerings for that though, because the fingerings are going to be rather straightforward and what you would expect, which is just going to be any finger that would naturally be placed to accomplish each note in that first position. So if we were to play in first position, for example, we'd just start on 3rd finger on the A string, which would be a 2nd string. It's all well and good and pretty simple, but if you want to get a little bit extra out of this carol and create a little bit more depth in your sound and beauty, you can try something a little more complicated, which is playing it up in position. This is going to get you a little bit more comfortable with 4th and 3rd position, which are the 2 suggested positions that we'll use for this carol for this live stream. If we go with the suggested fingerings, we're going to start in 4th position, so we see that 3 there. We're going to start in 4th position on the D string. So one way we can think of that is putting our 4th finger wherever the harmonic is. Another way we can think of it is putting our 1st finger wherever our 4th finger would naturally go in 1st position. We can think of positions as being related to where our 1st finger is. That's one way of thinking of them. But the way that I really like to think about positions is thinking about where our hand is set up, where our double contact, in other words. If you're subscribed to this channel, you probably have heard me say it many times, but there's a concept in violin playing that we call double contact. It was coined by a famous pedagogue called Ivan Galamia, And he talks about this idea that I really like, which is dealing with how we actually hold the instrument with the left hand. And he coined it as double contact. And the idea is that you hold the neck of the violin with 2 points of contact always, never one, never three, always 2 points of contact. Of course, like everything with violin technique, this always has a huge, huge exception. We're going to find exceptions to this rule all the time throughout violin playing, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good place to start. So what are these 2 points of contact, and what do they have to do with position? The 2 points of contact are going to be our thumb and our index joint. I like to think of it as the joint right where the finger starts. You are going to find that there's going to be variation in that for you, for whatever's comfortable, and the exact point for both of these contacts is going to change depending on what string you're on. But there's no serious rule that you have to do exactly something specific. What you should do is you should figure out what double contact is comfortable for you specifically, and you should make sure that that remains consistent for you based off of position and off of string level. So for example, if I'm playing on the G string, I'm going to have a double contact that's different than if I'm on the E string. If I'm on the G string, my index joint or my index finger might come higher up and my thumb might come lower to allow me to reach to the G string more comfortably. And if I were to play on the E string, I might do the exact opposite. My index might come lower, my thumb might come up. The reason we're talking about this is because in this carol, we're going to be dealing with position, which is the next important idea behind double contact. And the reason we focus on it so much is because double contact, in my opinion, is going to define your position. Often we think of first finger as defining our position, in other words, wherever the first finger lands. But I actually think it's better to think about where the hand is, which is defined by where it's touching the instrument, which is, again, the double contact. This is getting probably a little bit boring and complicated, but it's important to note, and it's really nice when you have very crystal clear ideas behind position. And since we're talking about position with this carol, I think it's worth mentioning. So in particular, where is my thumb? Where is my thumb and my index finger? My thumb and index finger that create that double contact are not going to be across from each other. They're going to be offset. And exactly how they're going to be offset is unique to you. Wherever you place that first finger, regardless of position, until a point, but with the positions we're dealing with today, certainly this is going to be true. Your first finger is going to land roughly across from that thumb. And so rather than thinking of where your first finger is as defining your position, your first finger's in second position, third position, fourth, instead of thinking of that, I encourage you to think about what positions are relative to your double contact. So where your thumb is and where your index joint are. That should define your position. And the reason I like the way that I think about positions in terms of where my first finger lands is related to my thumb, I like that so much because now for all these positions, I get to think about positions in terms of where my thumb is. And then it won't matter if I want to deflate my finger, play a high one, a low one. It won't matter. It won't change what my concept of my position is. I can retain that consistency. All this is to say that fourth position, our thumb is going to be where fourth position should be, which is roughly where our fourth finger would normally go, or across from where our fourth finger would normally go in first position. So on the D string, for example, our fourth finger is going to go on an A. If we think about where that A is, our thumb theoretically should be comfortably right around here for us to find a fourth position. And that's certainly true for me. That's where I find fourth position is going to be the most comfortable. And again, just like in any position, depending on what string we're playing, our double contact might change. My thumb might come higher on the E string, might go lower on the G string. Now, one last bit of complication to this is that what happens when we shift up on the instrument? At some point, our hand runs into the instrument. And if you think about our rule of double contact, we have our 2 points of contact, never 1, never 3. We end up with a third point of contact when we run into the instrument with our palm. And because of that, we now have 3 points of contact, and we're breaking our rule, and we're going to have a lot of tension. And one of the ways we can avoid that excess tension is by sticking to our rule. That's going to require us to remove one of our old points. We can't avoid the instrument. We're going to have to run into it at some point. We're going to have to start touching the instrument with our palm, which means we have to either remove the thumb or the index joint. If we remove the thumb, it's going to be really uncomfortable, especially if you use any amount of support with the thumb for holding the instrument. So what's going to be more comfortable is going to be releasing the index joint. And so right around fourth position for most people, we run into the instrument. And so at that point, we want to release that index joint. So the main difference between fourth position and third position for me is that in fourth position, I release this point of contact because I add this one. And then in third position, I'm not quite close enough for my personal hand shape. And so I release this point and I re-add this. So that's the main thing we're going to notice in these positions while we're playing through this carol. Now, just like how our double contact changes depending on what string we're on in first position, right? If we're on the E string, our double contact might look like this. It might come a little lower on the index joint, a little higher on the thumb. If we play on the G string, we might do the opposite. Just like that, in fourth position, we have the same kind of idea. Where my palm is making contact when I'm playing on the D string might be slightly different than when I'm playing on the G string. When I get to the end of this second measure here, if we stay in position, which we are going to do for this fingering, then we're going to need to play on the G string for this note. Now watch what happens to my left hand and its contact with the instrument when I get to that G. It moves almost a full centimeter, the contact point. It's right there right now. And then when I go to the G string, it moves up. I don't know how clear that is. Maybe we can get closer. When I move up to that G string, it's really subtle, but it feels really large for my hand. And depending on how comfortable you are with your positions or how defined they already are, that might make it feel less or smaller or larger of a change. For me, because I'm so comfortable with my fourth position at this point, I can really feel the difference when I'm changing from string to string. The alternative would be to not move, and then now my finger shapes need to change. Notice how it would need to elongate to play the G string. What we want to avoid when we're playing in position and having good intonation across the strings is we want to avoid the shapes of our fingers changing. All right, that's enough nitty-gritty talk on this carol. Let's play some of it. We're going to use the suggested fingering, and so we'll be in fourth position for most of this. So we have two options here, and I didn't write a fingering. We can either play, we're on a first finger because we're in fourth, right? We can either play first finger for both, or we can do a stretched fourth finger. Let's take a look at what each look like. I'm going to write the variation up here so we can see both fingerings. The fingerings will coincide on this note. Right? They will be the same after that point. Let's see. I'll start by playing the top fingering. It's not so bad. Now, what if I wanted to play it as legato, as smooth as possible? It becomes a little bit more challenging. There's a little bit of a hiccup getting from one string to the other. So one solution is I could place my first finger on both strings. And while it could solve our legato problem, where now we can play it without any break, it actually makes it a lot harder to vibrate. In general, vibrating with your finger placed in a fifth position, not in fifth position, but in a position on the fingerboard that plays a fifth, meaning the same place on two strings. It's very difficult to vibrato because vibrato is created by this knuckle allowing for a roll in the fingertip. And where the fingertip is on the string is really, really important for creating a good, consistent vibrato. And if you have a varying position of your tip of your finger for each string, you're going to be in trouble in terms of creating consistency of pitch and especially consistency of width of vibrato. So it's going to be a little bit strange, so it's a lot more comfortable to actually replace that first finger, but it doesn't allow for a very easy legato. So if you want it to be legato, the better solution for fingering would be to stretch the fourth finger, which seems excessive, but actually when you're in fourth position, it's not that far of a stretch. The higher we get on the instrument, the smaller the intervals get, and so the less physical or physically demanding these stretches become. In fact, the higher you get, sometimes the smaller the interval is, the harder they are. Now, whenever you're deciding to do a stretch, if you are deciding to do a stretch, rather, the important thing to think about is how you're conceptualizing the distance. And what I like to do whenever I'm thinking about doing a stretch is I like to think about where does my finger naturally want to go, define that clearly, and then afterwards define how far from that natural point the stretch is. That allows you to really understand what you're stretching, right? How far that stretch literally is. So where does our fourth finger naturally want to land so we know how far to go from? Generally, what's natural for fourth finger when related to one is going to be what's considered a perfect fourth. So that's going to be 2 whole steps and a half step, or you could call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half steps. Man, I should refresh my intervals. So then, if you wanted to think about how you're defining that stretch, I would define it as how far away A natural is from that G, from that fourth finger. And that, of course, is just a whole step. So I would think my stretch is a whole step away from where my fourth finger normally wants to go. My violin has a little bit of a wolf on B naturals. I like the the fourth finger stretch, but I think both are reasonable. And if you don't need to be extremely legato, which you don't need to be, it's a carol. It should be simple, shouldn't be overly technical. You can absolutely just do the 1-1 fingering, the top fingering. All right, let's see what goes on after that. We'll start from the beginning though. That's one of the dangers of doing the stretch, is you might play it a little flat. So we can see here the suggested fingering is what we're going to use, which is just using this half step to shift down from fourth position to third position. The reason there's no other fingerings written anywhere is because we're just going to assume we're using the finger that is expected or best serves whatever note based off of the position we're already in. We're just going to assume whenever we shift to a position, we're going to stay there until notified to leave it. We'll start from that second line. So we have a shift there, and whenever you have a shift in music, you should define how you're doing it. If you have questions about shifting, I've actually made an entire playlist dedicated to the mechanics of shifting on this channel. You can find it by going to the YouTube channel and looking through my playlist. It's called The Mechanics of Shifting. It's a wonderful series where I talk about all my ideas on shifting. It's very extensive. It's an older series, so the audio quality and video quality is not as good, but the information is very solid. One of the things we talk about, though, I can summarize it here, is the idea of defining your fundamental shift. Whenever we're shifting, we should understand what our fundamental shift is, meaning the most basic form of the exact shift we're doing. And the fundamental shift, the definition of it, is simply put, it's whatever the shift is where the old finger is going on the old string. So in this particular case, in measure 268, we're shifting from a G to a D. First finger to fourth finger. Now, our fundamental shift would be where our first finger, our old finger, in this case the G, the first finger, what note it goes to in order to accomplish the shift. And in this case, that's going to be an A natural. It's going to be, in other words, defining our shift as a whole step shift of positions, going from third position up to fourth. So even though we won't play our fundamental shift when we actually play through our repertoire, it's important to understand it always. So if you're ever having trouble playing a shift in tune, chances are really defining and being comfortable with your fundamental shift is going to be a really important step into making it a lot more consistent and a lot more reliable. Those are the same thing. I'm just being redundant at this point. Once we've shifted up, the second half is identical to the first half until a point. Till right around here. No, actually, it's still the same. Literally the same. I think. Yep, it's literally the same. So we don't have to go through all of that again. I'm just going to play through that second half of the carol once, just so we can hear it and have it on record. And then we'll move on to the etude, where we'll talk about finger agility. whistle tones there. I need to get a rehair. Okay, moving on. Let's take a look at the accompanying etude for this carol. This is the gift, as we call it, in the packet. Once again, you can find this entire packet, which holds all 6 of these carols and all 6 of these etudes, on the website if you want to support the channel. Otherwise, if you just want to practice the music, no strings attached, here it is for your screen capture. Well, at least that's the first half of it, and it'll continue to be on screen periodically throughout. You can just practice along and, of course, save this video for future reference. So this is probably my favorite etude that I wrote for this booklet. It has to do with, as it says, left-hand agility. I'm going to play a little bit of it. I'm not going to play it too fast, partially because I don't think I can play it very fast at the moment, and partially so that we can see what's happening. So, as you can see, we can still hear the outline of the melody, and that's pretty much how most of these etudes go, just with a different technique in mind. You can really see the left-hand agility taxes right up front. You can also play this alongside with someone who's playing the actual carol at the same time. They do line up together, which is quite nice. Now, what's difficult about this etude? How are we going about practicing it? And what can we gain from doing so? First, let's talk about the fingering. As you can see here, just like always on the channel, whenever you're looking at my own editions, anything that I've written or published, my rules are I always write a fingering if I'm telling you what position to start in and or where to shift to. And if there isn't a fingering written, you can assume you're playing just whatever fingering makes sense in that position. So we are given a third finger to indicate, yes, we are in first position here, and we're staying in first position. And so what's difficult? Well, getting this up to speed is very challenging because, as you can see here, we're alternating 3-4-3 like a trill, and we rhythmically have to change that pattern on these subdivisions. It's not easy to do, but when we're practicing for speed, like I've said on this channel before, one of the main things we do when we want to accelerate our playing, in this case accelerate our left hand, is we want to practice slow with fast habits. Practice slow with fast habits. What are fast habits? We know what practicing slow is, obviously, but what are fast habits? Well, fast habits are physically things that need to happen in order for something to be played quickly. So even though you're not practicing it quickly, you're playing it slowly, we need to take into account all the things that need to happen when we play it fast. So one of the things that happens when we play fast is we play with efficiency, right? Our fingers move the shortest amount possible, or the shortest distances possible at all times. So one of the most important fast habits that we should be thinking about when practicing etudes, especially one like this, is we should be thinking about what fingers don't have to move, what fingers have to move, and of the fingers that have to move, how much are they moving and can they move less? So let's start by thinking about what fingers have to move, or rather don't have to move. Well, from the start, we don't have to move our third finger, right? We have our third finger placed, and we get to keep it down until this point, until the C natural. So why would we lift it? And then what about that C natural? What about that second finger? That second finger, why can't it already be down from here? So rather than thinking, placing it, why not just have it down already? And we could go a step further and put the first finger down as well. You might find that placing this many fingers down can add some tension to your playing. And that's important to recognize in your own playing and depending on your own ability. But that's why we practice slow. We want to practice at a tempo that we can think about these things, do them, but maintain comfort and lack of tension. Another thing we should think about is, with regards to this efficiency and movement, is how simple the movements are. If you, for example, see your fourth finger, if the way it's lifting is not simple, so what's a simple movement? A simple movement would be one in which only one thing needs to occur, right? Or very few things need to occur. For example, if I lift this fourth finger in a simple way, I might lift it like this. Look at how the shape remains the same. All that happens is that this joint lifts it up. What if instead this happened, where all these joints are engaged? This joint, and this joint. They're all engaging to straighten the finger. That's a much more complicated movement than just picking the finger up from a single place. So another fast habit, in other words, is going to be thinking about maintaining shape of your fingers during their changes, as opposed to straightening. So we're trying our best to keep those movements very simple, very small, and without tension. Now, the second most important fast habit to think about, aside from moving efficiently, is grouping notes or grouping thought. And we can group thought by thinking about beats. So thinking about the strong beats versus the weak beats of each measure. We have 3 strong beats in 3/4. And so we can think of each of these strong beats as a unit. Da-da-ya-da-ya-da, da-da-ya-da, da-ya, da-ya. I'm a bad singer. So what is one way that we can physically practice conceptualizing groups? The easiest way is to use rhythm practice. You've probably seen this before, but it's a way of practicing in which you actually change the rhythms physically in order to help you group and think about multiple notes at a time. So when I'm holding a note, in this case, the very simplest rhythm we can do, I'm going to erase this for some room. The very simplest version is we can think of dotted short. We might write it like this. Oh god, my penmanship is terrible. So think of it as 16th, dotted 16th, 32nd, for example. But it doesn't really matter exactly. It doesn't have to be exactly rhythmic. The idea is that we hold a note, and then we think about the next two notes. 4-3, 4-3. So we're not thinking about placing a single note quickly. We're thinking about creating the next two notes as a pair, as one motion, as quickly as we can. This is a great way of starting to group more notes at a time. But when we're talking about grouping notes as with regards to the beats, the most useful version of this is a little bit more complicated, and it should be reserved for after you've done that basic rhythm practice. The next stage of rhythm practice is what we call fermata practice, which is where you start adding a fermata to the same part of every beat. We can start by adding it to the first note of every beat. So in other words, you think about, well, you play one note, and while you hold that note, while you hold this D, you're fully conceptualizing all four of the next notes, all four of them, and then all four of the next ones, and then all four of the next ones. And so you're grouping four notes at a time conceptually. You can change where that fermata is, but no matter where it is, you do the same idea. You think of the next four notes. Let's see what that looks like. Pretty weird when you do it, but it works out nicely. And again, whenever you have groups of four or groups of any amount of notes, as long as it's a consistent pattern, you can do this fermata practice as a way of producing groupings. But when we start to remove the fermata and we start to think about just grouping in real time and perhaps at a slow tempo, we can start to conceptualize these groupings by physically having inconsistent weight added to our left hand, not our right hand. So let's imagine inconsistent weight based off of our groupings. If we want to do the simplest grouping, that would be where we're thinking about every beat as a group. One thing we can do to conceptualize this grouping is to think about inconsistent weight of the left hand. So in other words, heavier on this first third finger, heavier on the next beat. So I'm emphasizing with the bow a little bit right now so you can actually hear it. But the idea is the same regardless. We are thinking about emphasizing in the left hand, putting a little bit of extra weight on each of these. Now, obviously, when we get to an open string, that doesn't happen, but instead of thinking about putting extra weight on it, something I'm thinking about is lifting extra strong, or lifting with extra energy. When I lift that second finger, I'm going to think about lifting it with extra energy in order to emphasize that open string in my mind. Talking about this right here, lifting that second finger with a little bit of extra energy. that's what I just played is another version of this kind of practice. It's similar to the fermata practice. It's one where you play 5 fast notes, and then you play another 5 fast notes, but you have an overlap. So we would play 5 fast notes, and then we would repeat that first note, and then we'd repeat that first note. It looks something like this. Again, it's the same idea. We're grouping these notes, we're creating these habits, these fast habits of playing and combining all of these notes into single ideas. And we're not necessarily playing the entire passage fast. This is the only way these things are the only way to really get pieces of repertoire and etudes up to a really high performance tempo. Unfortunately, there's no way to really just practice slowly and then practice a little bit faster and practice a little bit faster. You could theoretically do that, but you may have even tried that in the past and found that you hit a wall. And the reason for that is because there are certain ways you can physically play at slower tempos that just will not work at faster ones. So it doesn't matter how well you know the music or how well you know the notes. If your fingers are behaving in a way that won't allow them to play faster, doesn't matter how well you know it, you've developed these slow habits. So you have to practice with fast habits in mind whenever you're dealing with increasing agility. And then the second half is virtually the same, just like in the actual carol itself. Man, I fell off the wagon there. A little too fast. So hopefully you can use this etude along with the Away in a Manger to help build out some of that technique we talked about today with left hand agility and position work. Together, they'll make for a good use of your time in the practice room. And with that, I hope you have happy practicing this holiday season. Thank you so much for watching,